Lastly, Spayas Lashem Muchanli is Makribim by Akarbonos, Bechoygin Elav Shalish Pamim Bashana Shenemar Ba'asuli Mikdash. And it continues for Nesparish Batayna Mishkan Shasa Moshe Bein Availov Yishash Nemek Leivasa Madata. The Rambam brings the mitzvah, which is obviously a mitzvah to say L'daitis, from the fact that the Rambam brings it. Any mitzvah that's not L'daitis, any mitzvah that wasn't L'daitis, the Rambam doesn't count it as a mitzvah. So from the fact that it's counted as a mitzvah, obviously it's a mitzvah L'daitis. And that this is what's the point of the Beis Hamikdash? L'shittas and Rambam. We'll explain many times the Rambam and the Ramban. That according to the Rambam, the tachlis of the Beis Hamikdash is the karbanis. And what's the makar? Where do we know this from? From the pasuk of Va'asuli Mikdash. That's what the Rambam writes over here. Now this mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash is the Rambam brings it in another place. And the first halacha in Hilchos Menachem, the Rambam writes the mitzvah again over there. The Rambam writes, the lashon of the Rambam Hilchos Menachem is Shalish mitzvahs nitztavu Yisrael b'shatz knisas on la'aretz limna to be mana melech shenemer same tasam melech melech ola hachriz arish ala malek shenemer timcha zecher amalek and livnei lahem beis abchira shenemer l'shichnei sidishu uvasa shamos. Obviously, the question is meaning there's two chalukim in the way the Rambam writes it in Hilchos Beis Abchira and the way the Rambam writes it in Hilchos Menachem. First of all, the most obvious question is the pasuk. In Hilchos Beis Abchira, the Rambam brings the pasuk of Asuli Mikdash, and in Hilchos Menachem, the Rambam brings the pasuk of L'shichnei Sidrishu Uvasa Shama. The second question is more of a diakoloshin. In Hilchos Beis Abchira, the lashon of the Rambam is Lansi Spayas Lashem, and in Hilchos Menachem, the lashon of the Rambam is Livnei Slahem. So those are two the yokim. We'll focus first on the first one, the two different psukim. It's the question everyone asks. Why in Hilchos Beis Abchira the Rambam brings the pasuk of Vasili Mikdash, and in Hilchos Menachem he brings the pasuk of L'shichnei Sidishu Vasa Shama for exactly the same mitzvah. He brings two different psukim. So in Hilchos Menachem, the Lechem Mishnah answers. Lechem Mishnah explains. We find three different psukim throughout the Torah that speak about that are used as a makar for the mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash. Number one is Vasili Mikdash. And the next two are in Parshas Re'eh. The first one is in the beginning of Parshas Re'eh. The first one is L'shichnei Sidrishu Vasa Shama, and then a little later in pasuk Yud Beis, it's the lashon over there is V'haya Makom Ashivcha Hashem Lekechem by the Shakin Shemay Sham Shama Saviu Eiskol Shanechem Tzavas. So the Lechem Mishnah says that the first pasuk of Asuli Mikdash, that's referring to the Mishkan that they built in the Midbar. Second pasuk of L'shichnei Sidrishu is referring to Mishkan Shiloi. And the third, which Rashi says that as well over there in Parshas Re'eh, and the third pasuk of Ayam Makim is referring to Beis Eilamim. So he says, so in Hilchos Beis Abchira, the Rambam brings the first pasuk of Asuli Mikdash, which we're talking about the Mishkan. In Hilchos Menachem, he's bringing the pasuk of Shiloi, which from there we understand also that if it's a mitzvah in Shiloi, not just in the Midbar, so the Pashas, it will be a mitzvah l'daitis also. It will be a mitzvah l'daitis. Now, so why doesn't he bring the pasuk of, which speaks about Beis Eilamim, which speaks about the Beis Hamikdash, La'ilamim? So he says, because that pasuk is more of a sipur dvarim, mashenk in the pasuk of L'shichnei Sidrishu, which is more of a lashon of a tzivut. So that's what the Lechem Mishnah says. For two reasons. Number one, if you're going to tell me that the pasuk of Asuli Mikdash is not a tzivul l'daitis, it's only referring to the Mishkan that was in the Midbar. So why in Hilchos Beis Abchira, where the Rambam is speaking about the mitzvah l'daitis of building a Beis Hamikdash, would he bring that pasuk? Why wouldn't he bring a pasuk that's referring to forever? That's number one. The second question is that it says over there that one second. Anyway, no, actually, there's one question. Sorry about that. There's one question. That's the main question. Meaning, the why in Hilchos Beis Abchira, what does he bring a pasuk that's not l'daitis? That's the question. So now, there's another achrayim. They say another answer that in Hilchos Menachem, the Rambam is not bringing the pasuk of L'shichnei Sidrishu to as a makar for a chiyuv of building Beis Hamikdash. Because over here in Hilchos Menachem, the Rambam is saying he brings these three mitzvahs. But then he also goes into the seder of these three mitzvahs, that the minoi of a mitzvah's melech comes before Mechias HaMalek, and Mechias HaMalek comes before the Beis Hamikdash. So he says in the pasuk of the Shichnei Sidishu, a few psukim later, you have the pasuk of Avartim Esayardim, Yishaftim Ba'aretz, V'niech Lachem Min Kolei Vechem, Yisavim Shatim Betach, where you understand what the mashmos is, that the mitzvah we said before about building a Beis Hamikdash is only going to come after V'niech Lachem Min Kolei Vechem, Yisavim. So that's why the Rambam bring the pasuk of L'shichnei Sidishu in Hilchos Menachem, not to tell me The actual mitzvah of Beis Hamikdash I know from Basuli Mikdash. Over here, I'm just coming to bring a pasuk, which is a raya, which is a makar for the Seder Hadvarim. So now back then, there's a dion what the makar of the Rambam and Hilchos Menachem is. And the Mepharshim over here, the Neshek Kalim, they all say the makar of the Rambam is either from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, third parak in Sanhedrin, or from the Sifri. The problem with that is, the shaila, if you're going to say that that's the makar, is that the three psukim the Rambam brings over here, for Mitzvah Melech, he brings the pasuk of Shem Tosam Lach Melech, for Amalek, Tim Chazech Amalek, and from the Beis Hamikdash, L'Shechnei Sidishu, none of those psukim are brought in the Sifri and the Gemara. It brings completely different psukim over there. So the Rebbe says that it's mashma that the makar of the Rambam is not from the Gemara Sifri, but rather from the Midrashim, Medrash Tanchuma, and other Midrashim, where over there, Ataka brings these psukim. But there was that the problem with saying that is that in the Midrashim the order is not like the Rambam. The Seder of the Rambam, of where he first says the Mitzvah Melech and then Lachar Zari and then Livnus and Mesa Bechira, that's the Seder the way it is in the Gemara and Sifri, not the way it is in the Midrashim. That's one problem. Another is that if you look in the Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvahs, in the mitzvah of Mitzvah Beis Bechira, the Rambam actually directly quotes the Sifri. He quotes the Sifri bringing these three mitzvahs. So that doesn't mean that was the makar, but it's just a but at any rate, so if you look in the Gemara and Sifri, where the Gemara goes through the Seder, in the Midrashim are not talking about the Seder. It just brings the three mitzvahs. And it brings these three psukim, which each pasuk is a raya for the mitzvah. Same Tosam Melech Melech, that's a pasuk telling you that there's a mitzvah to be mana melech. Tim Chazecher Amalek is a pasuk telling you there's a mitzvah Mechias Amalek, and the same thing over there where it brings the pasuk of Asuli Mikdash. It doesn't bring the pasuk of the Shechnei Sidishu. Mashengen in the Gemara and Sifri, it brings other psukim. None of these psukim. It brings other psukim, where from there we see, and each of those psukim are raya for the Seder Hadvarim. That Minoi Melech comes before Mechias Amalek, and Sotam Mechias Amalek comes before the Binyan Beis Hamikdash. Now the Rambam doesn't bring any of the psukim from the Gemara and the Sifri, which those psukim are a raya for Seder Hadvarim. The Rambam brings three other psukim. So l'chayda it's fair to say that the Rambam's bringing the pasuk l'shechnei sidishu over here, which is not the pasuk the Gemara Sifri bring for the Seder, only to tell me the Seder Advarim. If that's what he wanted to do, he should bring the pasuk the Gemara says, which if you look at the pasuk the Gemara brings the third pasuk, which comes right after v'niach lachem mikolei veichem yisav. It says v'haya malkim mashivcha Hashem lekeichem, and that would make much more sense if you think about it. Meaning, first and telling you v'niach lachem mikolei veichem, then v'haya malkim. You see clearly the vart of the Seder. That after Mechias Amalek and Meniach Lachem and Kolel Veichem Yisaviv, I have a mitzvah of building Beis Hamikdash. Why would the Rambam bring an earlier pasuk and later on I see, which the Rambam doesn't mention the later pasuk B'chlal. If I look in the Chumash, I see a later pasuk, I see that it's mashma that this pasuk is coming after Mechias Amalek. Why would the Rambam bring such a pasuk to tell me the Seder Advarim? And
the answer is the fact that the pasuk's on Shilek.
Is if you say this part that's the Seder. True, but now the bigger cash on this part is if you look at the Rambam Melachim, there's two halachas over here. The first halacha is the Rambam just says the shalish mitzvahs in the Stav Yisrael, the Melech Lachar Zarish Hamalek Limnis and Beis Bechira, and then in the second halacha, which is a separate halacha Kolel Yisrael over here, he says meaning Melech Kedim L'Mochem Hamalek, and he starts to bring a pasuk for that, and then he says Vaiter the Achrasa Zera Hamalek Kedemus Bin Nabais, he brings a pasuk for that as well. And once you know that a melech comes before a malik and a malik comes before the Beis Hamikdash, itself understood the Beis Hamikdash is going to be at the last thing. So to say that in the first halacha, the Rambam's bringing a pasuk for the Seder, when in the next halacha, Yertz are speaking about the Seder, is l'chayda apel. So anyway, so that was a beer that someone says, it's just l'chayda very interesting. But the Rebbe is masber the chilik between why in Hilchos Beis Bechira the Rambam brings the pasuk of Asuli Mikdash, and in Hilchos Menachem the Rambam brings the pasuk of L'Shechnei Sidishu. Back to another shayla. The question is, why in Hilchos Menachem is the Rambam B'chlal mentioning the mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash? What does that have to do? Why is he mentioning it over there? Vishlam and the mitzvah of being mana melech, that's what it speaks about. Also Amalek, this is where the Rambam speaks about it. But building a Beis Hamikdash, you already spoke about it in Beis Bechira. Why is he mentioning it again over here? Now maybe you could think, it's like it's a trio, it goes together. Shalish mitzvahs. We're speaking about the first two. We already mentioned that chag of the third one. But if you look and Sefer HaMitzvahs, and by the mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash, over there the Rambam also mentions this part, the Shalish mitzvahs in Stav Yisrael. Why is he mentioning it over there? So that says that that the Rambam learns that there is these three mitzvahs are connected one with the other, and the shleimus of each one of them is only when you have all three together. But now in this thing itself, there's two things. Mitzad echad, meaning there's each individual mitzvah, which when were they nitztava on these three mitzvahs, and all three of them, the lashon is shalish mitzvahs nitztava Yisrael b'shas k'nisas on the Eretz. They were only nitztava on all three of them once they went into Eretz Yisrael. But at the same time, each one individually is only b'shleimus, only works if you have the other two. When were they nitztava to make a Beis Hamikdash, to make a Mishkan? That was when they were still in the Midbar. Basically, Mikdash, they had a tzivah right then. They didn't have yet the mitzvah of Menachem and that they were nitztava about that later, but they had the mitzvah of Basically Mikdash was right from the beginning, and that is only shayach, that's only b'shleimus if you're going to have the other two mitzvahs. So now, when the Rambam is speaking about an hilchos Beis Abchira, and he wants to tell me the words of that I'm making that there's a mitzvah to build a Beis Hamikdash. Where do I know that from? According to the Rambam, it says from Basically Mikdash. Basically Mikdash is a tzivah l'dairos. I know I have to make a Beis Hamikdash, and also I'm going to know that I am going to need Sayam Melech and Sayam Mechiyah Shal Malik, which in some sense the Yidden had that in the Midbar as well. Moshe Rabbeinu was a melech to a certain degree. Well, it was a melech, meaning it's not the same gather like you had a melech, a Shol and Dov and the Shleima melech, etc. But Moshe Rabbeinu had to get a certain gather of a melech, and also the other Menachem Samolik before. So you had those aspects, you had those in Yanam, which is why you were able to have the mitzvah of the Mikdash, but it wasn't so b'shleimus, it was still at a lower level. Now, as the Rambam continues in the Perek, as they progressed, it got better and better and better. When they went into Eretz Yisrael, in the first 14 years, they had the Mishkan in Gilgal. But then after that, after the 14 years of they were being kovish and being mechalek Eretz Yisrael, and they already settled down a lot more, and they already had Yehoshua, which Yeshua was more, in a sense, was more of a melech than Moshe Rabbeinu was. Yeshua was an Ismana as opposed to Moshe Rabbeinu. So, and they already had more of a Mechiyas Amalek. They conquered all the Shiva Amam and Bekhulah, to a certain degree. So then you already had, in Shiloh, you already had a binyan. And then eventually, till you had B'Shleimus with the Beis Hamikdash, was Shleima HaMelech. So the Rambam says, so in Hilchos Beis Abchira, where over there I'm talking about that's a mitzvah, the Beis Hamikdash, so that, where do I know that from? I know that from Vasuli Mikdash. But what's in this Chadash in Hilchos Menachem, why the Rambam brings the pasuk of the mitzvah of Beis Abchira again, this part that you need the three of them together, and that was B'Shleimus, only when you had the Beis Elamim. So there the Rambam brings the pasuk of the Shichnei Sidishu. The pasuk of the Shichnei Sidishu, that I mentioned before, and like Rashi says, that's referring to the Mishkan in Shiloh, which the Mishkan in Shiloh, in a sense, was already had a binyan. Not as much as Beis Hamikdash, but there was already a binyan. So over here, so that's why the Ram brings the pasuk of the Shichnei Sidishu, because it was in Hilchos Menachem is referring to the extra step that was when the Yidden came into Yisrael and they settled. They already had more of a binyan, more of a shleimus in these three mitzvahs. Fine. So that's the word of the two psukim. So now the shaila is. So why in Hilchos Beis Abchira the Rambam used the lashon lasis bayis, and in Hilchos Menachem the lashon of the Rambam is livnei lahem.
The lashon of the pasuk is va'asuli mikdash.
Oh, so you could say it's funny you were saying that in here in Hilchos Beis Abchira the Rambam brings the lashon of va'asuli mikdash. So maybe you want to say a lashon that's similar to that. And so the Rebbe mentions that Svara, and if I bring, and I show actually Matis Masay and Lamavo, the Rebbe mentions that Svara, but the Rebbe says that the Rambam's not coming to say Lashon HaPasuk, I'm saying Lashon HaLacha, and Halacha, I guess the word is you have to have the clearest Lashon, and Lasis is somewhat of an interesting Lashon, and a clear Lashon will be Livnos. So the Ragged Shavar, he tells us on this, the Chiluk HaLashon between Lasis and Livnos, and he says that the Chiluk between Lasis and Livnos, or Behektim, you can understand the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash. Shaila is, what exactly is the mitzvah? He says three oifanim. I don't understand all three of them, but the main word over here is the mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash, or that it should be built, that I should have a Beis Hamikdash. So he says the lashon of lasos is mashma, not so much that the mitzvah is to build it, but rather the mitzvah is it should be built, that it should be. And mashengin lashon of livnois is mashma that the is mashma that the mitzvah is to build it. So he says, so Hilchos Beis Abchira, the Rambam says lashon Allah is to tell me that what's together of the Not the word, so he's saying a different lashon of livness. I'm not sure myself exactly what the word is. He doesn't really tie choice. He just said that because last is to tell me that according to the Rambam, together the mitzvah of Beis Hamikdash that should be built, but not to actually build it. The Rabbi says, but based on this word, it's very clear why in Hilchos Beis Hamikdash it says last is, in Hilchos Menachem it says livnus. In Hilchos Beis Hamikdash we're coming to say that it together the mitzvah of making of building a Beis Hamikdash. So over there we have to say last is to tell me that together is that it should be built, not to build it. When Hilchos Menachem, what's the word of why does the Rambam Bechlal bring the mitzvah in Hilchos Menachem? Because of the added shleimus that was nischadish in the Beis Hamikdash once it came into Eretz Yisrael and they settled. Which that was nisbat in the puzzle of Shichnei Sindishim, the Mishkan Ashiloi, which what was the Chiddush in the Mishkan Ashiloi Legabi the Mishkan before? It was knife in the vineyard. So that's why the Rambam says the lashon of livness. Fine. So now, so just one more part over here, and there's a whole that's that part. But in the Ragachav over here with this, the whole part of lasis and livnois says if you're going to say that it's lasis, in other words, that the mitzvah is that it should be built, but there isn't a mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash. He says, if that the building of the Beis Hamikdash wouldn't be considered the mitzvah itself, but rather the hechsher mitzvah. Now, it's only a hechsher mitzvah, not the mitzvah itself. Now, we find this fakir other achrayim, we speak about it also. So, just want to point out a chilik in that. That's why so someone else was speaking about it. He speaks about it and he says, and that's the mashal from the Rambam that the entire point that the entire Mishkan it's only a hechsher mitzvah in order to what? In order to be makriv karbanis. That's how he understands it. And he says that the Rambam is arguing with Tosfos, the Tosfos in Shabbos, where Tosfos says that the mitzvah that the building Beis Hamikdash is the mitzvah itself. Fine. So he asks us, if you're going to tell me that according to the Rambam, the entire word of building Beis Hamikdash is only a hechsher mitzvah to makriv karbanis, the Rambam has a chklal that any mitzvah anything that's only a hechsher mitzvah, it's only is only there for further tachlis, it's not a mitzvah in and of itself, and it's not, you don't count this. And the Rambam brings the example of lakachta soilis. Says lakachta soilis. There's no mitzvah of lakachta soilis. It's only a hechsher mitzvah in order to make it upon it. So why is the Rambam? He asks, why is the Rambam counting it as a mitzvah?